I only said 5 words without screaming or causing a scene. I never received it. The rooftop party went dead silent as the CEO froze with his glass raised high to toast my $20,000 bonus. He thought this was a public relations moment, but I knew better. This was just the opening move. I had placed my queen on the board 3 years ago, and he never even saw it coming. My name is Lucy Lopez. I am 32 years old, and for the last 4 years, I have served as the Systems Operations Architect for Harbor Vanta Solutions. It is a title that sounds impressive on LinkedIn, but in reality means I am the plumber who keeps the digital sewage from backing up into the executive suites. I build the logic that runs the logistics. I see every packet of data, every authorization code, and every routed dollar. I know the anatomy of this company better than the people who claim to run it, and tonight, under the humid canopy of a mid-July evening in Midtown Atlanta, I was watching them lie to 200 people. The venue was one of those rooftop bars that charge $18 for a cocktail simply because they put a sprig of burnt rosemary in it. The air smelled of expensive perfume, humidity, and the specific kind of desperation that comes from middle management trying to network their way into a promotion. We were celebrating a record-breaking Q4, or so the banner above the DJ booth claimed. The music was a generic, upbeat house mix designed to make people feel productive and trendy simultaneously. I stood near the edge of the terrace, my back against the glass railing that offered a view of the sprawling city lights below. I held a glass of champagne that I had no intention of drinking. I was simply observing the ecosystem. Trent Hargrove, our chief executive officer, was holding court in the center of the room. Trent was a man who had been failing upwards since birth. He had the kind of jawline that inspired investor confidence and the kind of intellect that required me to explain two-factor authentication to him once a month. He was wearing a navy suit that likely cost more than my car, and his teeth were whitened to a degree that was almost aggressive. He tapped a spoon against his glass, the sharp ringing cutting through the ambient chatter. The music faded, the crowd turned, the spotlight, quite literally, swung to find him. Trent beamed, raising his hands in a gesture that mimicked a preacher welcoming his flock. He began his speech. It was the standard corporate sermon about synergy, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of excellence. I had heard it 3 years in a row. I tuned out the buzzwords until I heard my own name. "And there is our superstar," Trent announced, his voice booming with performative affection. He gestured toward me. The crowd parted, creating a corridor of eyes staring directly at where I stood. Lucy Lopez, the architect of our efficiency. I did not smile. I did not wave. I simply met his gaze with the neutral expression I usually reserved for reading server error logs. "We all know how hard the ops team worked this year," Trent continued, pacing slightly to his left to ensure the board members in the VIP section could see his profile. "And I am a big believer in putting our money where our mouth is. That is why I was thrilled to sign off on a $20,000 performance bonus for Lucy this quarter." Applause rippled through the crowd. It was enthusiastic. People love a generous leader. They love the idea that hard work is rewarded. $20,000 was a life-changing amount for the junior developers standing near the bar. It was a down payment on a house. It was student loan relief. It was a symbol that Harbor Vanta Solutions was a meritocracy. Trent raised his glass higher, locking eyes with me, waiting for the gratitude. He wanted the blush, the humble nod, the teary-eyed thank you that would validate his benevolence. He wanted his photo op. I waited for the applause to die down. I waited until the silence was absolute, the kind of silence where you can hear the ice shifting in the glasses. I spoke clearly, my voice flat and unmodulated. I never received it. The silence that followed was not merely quiet, it was a vacuum. It was as if someone had reached for the main power cable of the evening and yanked it out of the wall. The smile on Trent's face did not disappear immediately. It curdled. It froze in place, a rictus of panic wrapped in layers of foundation and self-assurance. He blinked. Once, twice, the glass in his hand wavered ever so slightly, a microscopic tremor that betrayed the sudden collapse of his reality. I did not look away from him, but my peripheral vision was sharp. I saw the others, to my right, standing near the oyster bar, was Miles Ketter, the chief financial officer. Miles was a man who sweated when the air conditioning was set to 68 degrees. Upon hearing my words, his entire body jerked as if he had been stung by an invisible wasp. His hand spasmed, and a splash of red wine sloshed over the rim of his glass, staining his pristine white cuff. He did not wipe it off. He just stared at me, his eyes wide and terrified. Near the entrance, Caroline Voss, the director of human resources, had chosen the wrong moment to eat a shrimp cocktail. She made a wet, choking sound, hand flying to her throat, eyes bulging as she struggled to swallow. She looked like she had just realized the shrimp was poisoned. And then there was Elaine Sutcliffe, the general counsel. Elaine was the most dangerous person in the room because she was the only one who actually read the contracts. She did not choke. She did not twitch. She simply lowered her head and stared into the bottom of her drink, as if she wished she could dissolve into the liquid and evaporate. She knew, in that split second, she knew exactly what legal landmines had just been stepped on. Trent recovered first, or at least he attempted to. He let out a laugh that sounded like dry leaves being crushed. "Well," he said, his voice an octave higher than before, "we all know how banking hours work. Lucy, I am sure it is just stuck in the payroll pipes. It will hit your account by Monday." He looked around the room, inviting everyone to join in his dismissal of reality. A few sycophants chuckled nervously, but the air had gone cold. The illusion had been punctured. I did not let him have the out. I did not let him smooth the edges. I just wanted to know what I was celebrating. I said, I did not wait for a response. I placed my full glass of champagne on the passing tray of a stunned waiter. I did not nod to my colleagues. I did not look at Miles, who was now frantically typing something on his phone with shaking thumbs. I turned and walked toward the elevator. The walk to the exit felt long, but my pulse did not quicken. I checked my smartwatch. My heart rate was resting at 62 beats per minute. This was not a confrontation. This was simply data entry. I had inputted a variable, and now I was observing the system's output. I left the building and stepped out into the humid Atlanta night. The valet brought my car around, a sensible sedan that blended into traffic. I drove home in silence, the city passing by in a blur of neon and headlights. I did not turn on the radio. I needed the quiet to organize the next sequence of events in my head. My apartment was cool and dark when I arrived. It was a sanctuary of minimalism. Everything had a place. Everything had a function. I kicked off my heels and walked straight to my home office. It was the only room in the house that felt truly alive, hummed by the quiet whir of cooling fans. I sat down at my desk and woke up my personal laptop. It was a custom build, completely air-gapped from my work devices, running a secure operating system that I had modified myself. The screen glowed blue, illuminating my face. I did not cry. I did not feel the sting of betrayal. Anger is a messy, inefficient emotion. It clouds judgment and leads to sloppy mistakes. I had processed the anger 3 years ago when I first noticed the discrepancies in the budget allocation. Now, all I felt was the cold satisfaction of a mechanic who has finally located the source of the engine rattle. I navigated through my encrypted partition. I bypassed 3 layers of security protocols that I had designed to keep prying eyes out. I clicked on a folder that sat alone on the desktop. I had named it simply, "When They Get Stupid." It was not a threat. It was a contingency plan. I had hoped I would never have to open it. I had hoped that Harbor Vanta Solutions would eventually correct its course, that the greed at the top would not trickle down far enough to drown the people doing the actual work. But hope is not a strategy. Inside the folder were subdirectories labeled by date and department. There were gigabytes of data. I had the original employment contract I had signed. I had every addendum. I had the raw logs from the payroll server. I had the chat history that Miles thought he had deleted. I looked at the file created 3 months prior. It contained a scanned copy of a memo regarding discretionary bonuses, a document that Trent had signed without reading, just like he signed everything else. The game had officially started. They thought they were playing checkers. They thought they could move a piece, jump over me, and take my money without consequence. They did not realize that we were playing chess, and I had been positioning my pieces while they were busy planning their party. I opened the first document and began to type. The click of the mechanical keyboard was the only sound in the room, rhythmic and precise, like the ticking of a clock counting down to 0. To understand why I was so calm on that rooftop, you have to understand the nature of the folder currently open on my screen. It was not a scrapbook of grievances, it was an autopsy of their integrity, conducted while they were still breathing. Most people wait until they are fired to start gathering evidence. By then, it is too late. Access is revoked. Emails are wiped. The narrative is already written by the people with the loudest voices. I work in systems architecture. My entire job is based on the principle of redundancy and fail-safes. You do not install the fire extinguisher after the building has burned down. You bolt it to the wall the day you pour the foundation. The construction of this particular safety net began 3 months ago. It had started innocuously enough. I had walked into Elaine Sutcliffe's office with a bland smile and a request for my original employment contract. I told her my accountant needed the wet ink version for a specific tax filing regarding remote work deductions. It was a boring, administrative lie, the kind that makes people's eyes glaze over. Elaine did not even look up from her salad. She just pointed to the filing cabinet and told her assistant to make me a copy. I asked for the original just to verify the signature, and while the assistant was distracted by a phone call, I took high-resolution scans of every page, including the heavy indentations of the pen strokes, and verified the metadata on the digital counterpart. I needed to be sure that the clause 9.2 on paper was the same as the clause 9.2 in the database. Contracts have a funny way of evolving when they are stored on company servers, controlled by people like Miles Ketter. I clicked open the subfolder labeled Financials. Inside were the breadcrumbs that led to the missing $20,000. It was not a single theft. It was a series of quiet adjustments. I pulled up a spreadsheet I had compiled from raw data scrapes of the expense reporting server. There were 3 invoices from a vendor listed as Azure Horizon Events. The name sounded corporate and vague, the kind of shell company name you buy for $50 online. The invoices were flagged as business development, a category that is notoriously opaque. But when I cross-referenced the tax identification number on the invoice with public business registries, Azure Horizon Events did not exist as a consulting firm. It was the holding company for a luxury villa rental agency in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The dates of the invoices aligned perfectly with the dates of the upcoming executive strategic retreat. I opened the next file. It was a budget reallocation memo dated November 15th. The subject line was Q4 discretionary realignment. It looked official. It had the company letterhead. It had the dense, jargon-filled paragraphs that are designed to discourage reading, but the numbers told the story. The memo authorized the transfer of $60,000 from the employee compensation pool, specifically the subledger for performance bonuses, into the General Administrative Fund. That fund was the slush pile used to pay for client dinners, first-class upgrades, and apparently, villa rentals in the Caribbean. They had not just forgotten to pay me, they had looted my bonus to pay for their vacation. But the centerpiece of the folder, the file that made my pulse steady rather than race, was a screenshot. Harborvanta uses a popular enterprise chat platform. They assume it is secure. They assume that if they delete a message, it is gone. They forget that I am the one who configured the retention policies for the archive servers. Nothing is ever truly deleted in my system unless I want it to be. The screenshot was a private conversation between Miles Ketter and Trent Hargrove. Dated December 20th. Miles wrote, "We are over budget on the island retreat deposit. The liquidity is tight until the Series B funding hits in February." Trent replied, "Make it work. We need this win. The optics are crucial." Miles wrote back, "I can pull from the bonus pool. We have 3 devs and Lopez due for payout. I can ghost Lopez's bonus for now. She is loyal. She won't make a scene. We can backfill it next quarter if she asks." If she asks? I stared at the word ghost. It was such a juvenile term. It was the language of bad dating, not corporate finance. It reduced my labor, my late nights, and the millions of dollars I had saved the company through automation into something trivial. something that could be made to disappear because it was inconvenient for their social calendar. That was the moment they lost me. It was not the money. I have savings. I have investments. It was the arrogance of the assumption. They assumed I was a non-player character in their game. They assumed I was part of the furniture, reliable and silent. I am not the type of person who flips a table. I do not scream in meetings. I do not send passive-aggressive emails with everyone copied on the carbon copy line. That is amateur hour. That is noise. I am an architect. I build structures. And if you compromise the integrity of the structure I built, I do not smash the windows. I simply remove the load-bearing walls that I installed and watch gravity do the rest. I minimize the chat log and open the payroll batch files for the last pay period. This was the final nail. I had access to the back-end logs of the payroll processor. It is necessary for my job, as I have to ensure the API integrations between our time-tracking software and the bank are functioning. I pulled up batch 404, the file processed 48 hours ago. I ran a simple query for the bonus codes. There were 15 names on the list. 14 of them had a status code of 200, which means success. The funds had been transferred. The transaction IDs were generated. My name was the 15th, next to Lucy Lopez. The status code was different. It was not an error code. It was not an insufficient funds code. It was a manual override code, hold administrative. I checked the user log to see who had applied the tag. The user ID was mketter admin. Miles had manually gone into the system and paused my payment. He had done it at 10:30 at night on a Tuesday. He had clicked the button, likely while sitting on his couch, perhaps while looking at photos of the villa he was going to rent with my money. I leaned back in my chair. The room was silent. The only light came from the monitor. Reflecting off my glasses, I had verified the breach. The contract stated clearly that performance bonuses, once communicated and metrics verified, were considered earned wages. By failing to pay them on the agreed-upon date, which was today, they were in default. But more importantly, they had triggered Clause 9.2. I had written Clause 9.2 myself 3 years ago. At the time, the company was small, chaotic, and desperate for me to fix their broken infrastructure. I had leverage. I told them I wanted a clause that protected my intellectual property. They did not even read it closely. They saw the words intellectual property and assumed it meant I could not steal their code. They were wrong. It meant they could not steal mine. The clause stipulated that the proprietary automation scripts, the layered security protocols, and the efficiency algorithms I created remained my intellectual property, licensed to harbor Vanta solutions on a conditional basis. The condition was simple, continuous, uninterrupted employment and compensation in accordance with the agreed terms. If compensation was withheld without written cause for more than 24 hours past the due date, the license for those specific protocols was automatically suspended. It was a kill switch wrapped in legalese. I looked at the clock. It was 1 a.m. The 24-hour grace period had expired exactly 1 hour ago. I opened my email client. I did not use my work email. I used the secure, external server that was listed in the contract as my official address for legal notices. I composed a new message to Elaine Sutcliffe, General Counsel, Trent Hargrove, CEO, Miles Ketter, CFO. I did not write a long explanation. I did not attach the chat logs or the budget memos. I did not threaten to sue. I did not ask where my money was. I typed the subject line. Clause 9.2. Notice of invocation. That was it. No body text, no signature. Just the subject line. I hovered my cursor over the send button. In chess, the knight is a unique piece. It is the only piece that can jump over others. It moves in an L shape, stepping aside and then moving forward. It is deceptive. It looks like a minor piece compared to the queen or the rook. It sits quietly on the board, often ignored in the early game. But when a knight lands in the right spot, it forks the board. It attacks 2 pieces at once, forcing the opponent to choose which one to lose. Trent thought the party was the game. He thought the toast was the move. He did not realize the game had been played 3 years ago in a dusty conference room when I handed him a pen. I pressed the enter key. The email vanished from my outbox with a soft swoosh sound. It was a light, almost imperceptible sound, but I knew that on the other side of town, in 3 separate inboxes, a bomb had just armed itself. They would wake up to it. They would read it while sipping their morning coffee. They would probably laugh at first, thinking it was a joke or a mistake. Then Elaine would open the contract. I closed my laptop. I stood up and walked to the window. Looking out at the sleeping city, I felt a profound sense of calm. The system was now executing the logic I had written. The input was betrayal. The output would be ruin. Monday morning at Harbor Vanta Solutions usually possessed a specific, dull texture. The walls were painted a shade of beige that seemed designed to suppress human creativity, and the air was typically recycled coolness, smelling faintly of floor wax and ambition. But today, the air was different. As I walked through the double glass doors at 9 in the morning, the office did not smell like a tech company. It smelled like a hospital waiting room. It smelled of burnt coffee and fear. The silence was the first indicator. Usually, the open-plan floor would be buzzing with the sound of mechanical keyboards and the low murmur of stand-up meetings. Today, heads were down. Eyes were glued to screens. When I walked past the marketing department, 3 people stopped talking mid-sentence and looked at their phones. They knew. In a corporate ecosystem, bad news travels faster than light, and the rumor that the system's architect had declared war on the C-suite had clearly circulated over the weekend. I had just set my bag down at my desk when my internal phone line blinked red. It was not a request. It was a summons. Elaine Sutcliffe's executive assistant sounded breathless on the other end. "Elaine needs to see you in the main conference room immediately," she said. "Do not bring anything. No laptop, no notes, just you." I hung up the phone and felt a cold, sharp smile touch the corner of my mouth. Do not bring anything. It was the oldest lawyer trick in the book. They wanted me unmoored. They wanted me separated from my data, stripped of my reference materials, and forced to rely on memory while they assaulted me with paperwork. They wanted a defenseless employee they could bully into a retraction. I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. I grabbed my encrypted external hard drive. I picked up the thick physical file folder containing the printed logs. I walked to the conference room carrying everything. The conference room was a glass box in the center of the floor, usually referred to as the fishbowl. Today, the blinds were drawn tight. I opened the door and stepped inside. Elaine Sutcliffe was sitting at the head of the long mahogany table. She looked as though she had not slept since Friday. Her blazer was draped over the back of her chair, and her usually immaculate hair was pulled back into a severe, messy bun. In front of her sat a single document. It was my employment contract. She did not offer me coffee. She did not offer me a seat. She simply watched me place my laptop on the table and open it. The blue glow of my screen seemed to irritate her. "I told you not to bring that," Elaine said. Her voice was tight, like a violin string wound to the point of snapping. "I am an architect, Elaine," I replied, sitting down and folding my hands on the table. "I never visit a demolition site without my blueprints." Elaine sighed, a long, ragged exhale that signaled the end of her patience. She reached out and tapped the document in front of her. A yellow sticky note was plastered onto page 14. I knew exactly what paragraph it marked. "We received your email," she said. "The board received it. The external auditors received it. Do you have any idea what kind of firestorm you have started? Lucy, you cannot just invoke legal clauses like magic spells." I leaned forward. I did not raise my voice. "It is not magic," I said. "It is contract law. You are the general counsel. You should know the difference." Elaine rubbed her temples. She looked down at the paper, reading the words she must have read 100 times since Saturday morning. Clause 9.2. She read aloud, her voice flat. "In the event of compensation default exceeding 24 hours post-verification, the employee retains full intellectual property rights over all custom-built operational architecture. Said license to the employer is immediately suspended until full restitution is made." She looked up at me. Her eyes were not angry anymore. They were confused. I checked the metadata. Lucy, you wrote this. You drafted this clause yourself 3 years ago when we were acquiring the logistics startup. We just copy-pasted it into the restructuring agreements. I nodded. 3 years ago. I was the only person in the room who understood that code was not just typing. It was leverage. I knew that one day, a company like this would try to treat me like a disposable asset. I planted Clause 9.2 like a seed, waiting for the rain. I wrote it to protect my work. I said, and since my work is currently powering 80% of your revenue stream, I suggest we take it seriously. Elaine shook her head. This is extortion, she said, trying to regain her footing. You are holding the company hostage. Incorrect. I said, extortion is a crime. This is a repossession. If you stop making payments on a car, the bank takes the car back. You stopped paying for the architecture. I am simply taking the keys back. Elaine opened her mouth to argue, but then she stopped. She was a good lawyer. She knew I was right. She knew that if this went to court, a judge would look at the clear language of the contract, look at the unpaid bonus, look at the phantom vendor invoices I had hinted at, and rule in my favor. She was trapped, and she knew it. So, what does this mean? She asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. What is a layered protocol? I turned my laptop around so she could see the screen. I had brought up a visualization of the company's network. It looked like a complex subway map, with lines of data intersecting at various hubs. Most of the lines were currently blinking amber. It is a defensive measure, I explained, pointing to the central node. I did not destroy anything. I am not a vandal. All your data is intact. All your client lists are safe. Elaine looked relieved for a split second. However, I continued, I have activated a series of encryption locks on the integration layer. Think of it like this. You have a warehouse full of goods. I have not burned down the warehouse. I have simply changed the locks on the doors and scrambled the frequency of the RFID scanners. The robots can move the boxes, but they cannot read what is inside them. The billing system can generate invoices, but it cannot pull the shipping data to populate them. Elaine's face went pale. She understood the implication. A logistics company that cannot match shipping data to billing data is not a company. It is just a building full of confused people and boxes. You paralyzed us, she whispered. I paused the license. I corrected her. The license allows for seamless integration. You are currently operating on the unlicensed version. It is clumsy, manual, and slow, just like the payroll department that failed to process my check. At that moment, the door to the conference room flew open. Trent Hargrove did not walk in. He invaded the space. He was wearing a tracksuit, which was his way of signaling that he was in crisis mode, but he looked less like a leader and more like a man who had been running away from something. His face was flushed. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the water pitcher. Fix it, he barked, staring at me. Fix it right now. Lucy, I have the VP of Operations on the phone screaming that the dispatch system is asking for a 24-character decryption key. I looked at him calmly. I did not flinch. Good morning. Trent, I said. Stop the games, he shouted. He pointed a shaking finger at the contract lying in front of Elaine. I saw that email. I saw that ridiculous legal jargon. Clause 9.2. Are you kidding me? He grabbed the contract and held it up, shaking the paper. I signed this because I trust my team, he yelled. I saw this paragraph about intellectual property and protection protocols. I thought it was just flavor text. I thought it was just words to make the contract look heavy. I thought it was just cool words to make us sound sophisticated to the investors. The room went dead silent. Elaine closed her eyes. She looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. The CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech company had just admitted, out loud, in front of legal counsel, that he signed binding contracts assuming the terms were merely decorative. He thought it was decoration. He thought my career, my safeguards, and my legal rights were just aesthetic choices, like the art in the lobby. I stood up slowly. I smoothed the front of my skirt. I looked Trent directly in the eyes. I saw the panic behind the bluster. He was used to bullying people with noise. He was used to people crumbling when he raised his volume. He had no idea how to handle someone who operated in absolute silence. I reached out and gently took the contract from his hand. He was so surprised he let go. I placed it back on the table, right in front of Elaine, smoothing the paper where his grip had wrinkled it. I spoke clearly, enunciating every syllable so that there would be no confusion, no room for interpretation, and no possibility of a misunderstanding. It is not flavor text. Trent, it is a clause, and it has been activated. Trent stood there, his mouth slightly open, the air conditioning system humming in the ceiling above us. He looked at Elaine, waiting for her to jump in, to yell at me, to fire me, to do something. Elaine did not move. She just looked at the sticky note on page 14. I sat back down and opened a new terminal window on my screen. The command prompt blinked, a steady, rhythmic cursor waiting for input. "Now," I said, looking between the two of them, "we can discuss the terms of the decryption, but I suggest we do it quickly. The secondary protocol initiates in 4 hours, and that one disconnects the external APIs for the trucking fleet." Trent collapsed into the chair opposite me. The fight had drained out of him as quickly as it had arrived. He realized, perhaps for the first time in his life, that he was not the one holding the controller. He was just another character on the screen. And I had just paused the game. The air in the conference room had shifted from shock to a frantic, disorganized barter. Trent Hargrove, a man who usually signed checks with a flourish of a fountain pen, was now tapping furiously on his smartphone. His face was slick with a thin sheen of perspiration. He looked like a gambler trying to place a bet after the wheel had already stopped spinning. "I am pushing the transfer right now," Trent announced, his voice tight. He held up the phone so Elaine and I could see the banking app interface. "Look, $20,000. It is initiating immediately. We can call this a clerical error. The money will be in your account in 10 minutes. Then you turn the keys back over." "Deal?" He reached out his thumb to press the confirm button. I did not move to stop him physically. I simply spoke, my voice cutting through the hum of the projector. "If you press that button, Trent, I will have to amend my filing to include attempted bribery and corruption of a compliance protocol." Trent's thumb hovered over the glass. He froze. He looked at Elaine. Elaine rubbed her forehead. Her eyes squeezed shut. She knew exactly what I was referencing. "She is right," Elaine whispered, sounding exhausted. "Clause 9.3. I nodded. Clause 9.3 states that once the Intellectual Property Protection Protocol is activated, any direct financial transfer from an executive account to the claimant outside of the standard payroll batch processing can be interpreted as an illicit attempt to bypass security controls. It is not restitution. It is a bribe to reverse a security lockout. Trent stared at his phone as if it had turned into a live grenade. "So I cannot pay you?" he asked, his voice rising in disbelief. "I am trying to give you the money you claim you are owed, and you are telling me I cannot give it to you." "You can," I replied calmly, "but you have to do it through the payroll system, which requires a documented audit trail, tax withholding, and a formal apology letter acknowledging the breach. You cannot just Venmo me hush money and expect the encryption to vanish." Trent slowly lowered his phone. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and confusion. He was discovering that money, his universal solvent, did not work on this particular stain. The door opened softly, and Caroline Voss slipped inside. The director of human resources walked in with the practiced gentleness of a hospice nurse. She was carrying a tray with 4 bottles of water, a peace offering that felt absurd given the stakes. "Lucy," Caroline said, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that felt like duct tape being slapped over a bursting pipe. "Can we just take a breath? I am sure we are all just a little emotional right now." I looked at her. I was not emotional. I was executing code. Caroline placed a water bottle in front of me. She pulled up a chair and sat close, invading my personal space with the scent of vanilla and denial. "We value you so much." "Lucy," she said, leaning in, "you are the heart of our operation. We just need a little time to sort out this glitch. Can you just pause whatever it is, the protocol? Just for 24 hours. Give us a grace period to make the paperwork right. It was a trap. If I paused the protocol voluntarily, I would be admitting that the breach was not critical. It would weaken my legal standing. It would turn a contract violation into a simple workplace dispute. I pulled my notebook closer. I picked up my pen. "I have noted your request. Caroline," I said, writing the date and time on the page. "However, I need you to submit that request in writing, signed by both you and the CEO, stating that you are asking for a suspension of security measures despite an active contract default." Caroline's smile faltered. "Well, we do not need to be so formal, do we?" she asked, her laugh sounding brittle. "We are all on the same team." I did not smile back. "I am not on the team right now. Caroline, according to the system, I am an unpaid external licensor. I will not delay corrective action based on a verbal request." The room fell into a tense stalemate. I sat in silence, my posture perfect, my hands folded on the table. I became a mirror, reflecting their own incompetence back at them. And as usually happens when people are faced with their own failure, they began to turn on each other. It started with a murmur from Trent. "I told payroll to prioritize the executive bonuses," he muttered, pacing the length of the room. "But I never told them to skip the staff. This is a back-end issue." Caroline bristled. She turned to Trent, her sweet persona dropping instantly. "Payroll does not make decisions. Trent," she snapped, "we process what finance approves. I sent the batch file to Miles on Thursday. If Lucy was not on it, that is because Miles took her off. I typed a command into my laptop, bringing up the logs, but I kept my eyes on them. I was watching the alliance crumble. Miles Ketter, who was on the speakerphone because he was allegedly dealing with a bank issue, cracked. His voice came through the Polycom unit, tinny and defensive. "Do not put this on me," Caroline Miles shouted. "I balanced the ledger based on the liquidity forecast Trent gave me. We were short on cash flow because of the retainer for the consulting firm. I had to make a choice. I thought the system would autocorrect in the next cycle. It was a system glitch, not a malicious act. A system glitch. They always blame the machine. It is the modern version of the dog ate my homework." I listened to them bicker. Trent blamed Miles for poor cash management. Miles blamed Trent for excessive spending on the retreat. Caroline blamed the software for not flagging the error. They were weaving a tapestry of lies, each thread pulling tighter around their own necks. While they were busy throwing each other under the bus, I quietly alt-tabbed to a different window on my laptop. I had built a private tracker years ago. I called it the authorization trail. It was a script that scraped the metadata of every financial approval that passed through the executive dashboard. It did not just show where the money went. It showed who clicked the button, what device they were using, and most importantly, what they deleted afterwards. I filtered the search results for the code Miles had used on my file. Discretionary hold do not flag. I wanted to see if I was special. I wanted to see if this was a targeted attack on me, or if this was standard operating procedure. The results populated the screen. I saw my own name at the top, dated 3 days ago, but then I saw the pattern. The same code had been used 2 other times in the last quarter. I scrolled down. 1 month ago, a senior developer named Marcus had his overtime pay held. The note next to the code was identical. Marcus had quit 2 weeks later, frustrated and burned out. He never got that money. 2 months ago, the entire customer support team had their quarterly performance incentives delayed. The funds were held for 3 weeks, then released. But during those 3 weeks, the money sat in a holding account. I frowned. Why hold it? Why risk the morale of the staff? Then I saw the other side of the transaction. Every time the discretionary hold code was used, a corresponding transfer was made from the general operating fund to a vendor account. The amounts matched almost perfectly. When Marcus was denied his $5,000, a transfer of $5,000 went to a company called Hartnell Logistics. When the support team was denied their $15,000, a transfer of $15,000 went to Hartnell Logistics, and when my $20,000 was held, a transfer of $20,000 was queued for Hartnell Logistics. My fingers hovered over the keys. Hartnell Logistics. I had never heard of them. They were not on the approved vendor list for our supply chain. They were not a software provider. I quickly ran a query on the vendor ID. It was a shell, a ghost. The address listed was a post office box in Delaware. I felt a cold realization wash over me. This was not just about paying for a party. This was not just mismanagement. This was embezzlement. They were skimming employee bonuses, parking the cash in a dummy vendor account to use for something else, and then hoping they could refill the pot before anyone noticed. I looked up at the three of them. Trent was now yelling at Miles about the interest rates on a bridge loan. Caroline was checking her nails, looking bored and annoyed. Elaine was reading the contract again, looking for a loophole that did not exist. They had no idea what I was looking at. They thought I was just a disgruntled employee fighting for a paycheck. They did not realize I was looking at a felony. I could have spoken then. I could have turned the laptop around and shown Elaine the money trail. I could have ended it right there, but I stayed silent. In chess, you do not capture a pawn if it reveals your position to the queen. You wait. You let the opponent think they are safe. You let them make one more move, one more mistake that exposes the entire board. I needed to know who Hartnell Logistics was. I needed to know who was really signing the checks on the other end. I closed the window. I looked at Trent. I am waiting for the written confirmation of your request, I said, my voice steady. Until then, the protocol stands. Trent slammed his hand on the table. Fine, he yelled. You want a paper trail? I will give you a paper trail. But you better be ready to unlock this system the second the ink is dry, or I will sue you for corporate sabotage. I adjusted my glasses. I look forward to it. I said, I was not looking forward to his signature. I was looking forward to the next hour, because while they were busy drafting a meaningless memo, I was going to find out who was hiding behind the name Hartnell. And once I found that, I would not just take my bonus, I would take the whole company apart, brick by brick. The fluorescent lights of the open plan office hummed with a frequency that usually gave me a headache, but this afternoon, I did not hear them. I was in a tunnel. My noise-canceling headphones were on, playing nothing, simply acting as a do not disturb sign to the rest of the world. On my screen, the mundane architecture of Harborvanta Solutions was stripping itself naked, layer by layer. I had returned to my desk after the confrontation in the conference room with a singular purpose. They thought I was looking for my $20,000. That was their mistake. They assumed my scope was limited to my own bank account. But when you find a termite in your living room, you do not just kill the termite, you check the foundation. I started with the fourth quarter performance payouts. Accessing the ledger was not difficult. As the systems architect, I had root access to the database that housed the financial reporting tools. I was not supposed to look at the raw data that was the domain of finance, but I wrote the script that backed it up every night at 3 a.m. I pulled the backup file from 2 days ago, mounting it on a virtual drive so that no access logs would trigger on the live system. I filtered for executive compensation and performance bonuses. The first thing I found was a slap in the face. 2 vice presidents, men who spent more time on the golf course than in the office, had missed their key performance indicators by wide margins. The sales targets were down by 12%. Client retention was in the red. By the strict rules of the company handbook, the same handbook Elaine Sutcliffe liked to quote, they should have received 0. Instead, the ledger showed 2 payouts of $40,000 each. I traced the source of funds. The money had not come from the executive bonus pool, which was empty due to market headwinds. It had been transferred from the employee incentive fund. My stomach tightened. That was the pot of money meant for the developers, the support staff, the people who actually built the product. Trent had taken $80,000 from the workers to pay off his lieutenants for failing. It was classic corporate cannibalism, but that was just bad ethics. It was not necessarily a crime. Depending on how loosely they defined discretionary reallocation, I needed something harder. I needed the ghost. I went back to the name I had found earlier, R. Hartnell. I ran a query across the entire database for that string of text. The results were scattered and strange. R. Hartnell was listed as a strategic consultant in the accounts payable ledger, in the project management system. R. Hartnell was tagged as an external advisor. I opened the personnel file attached to the name. It was a masterpiece of laziness. A real employee file has weight. It has tax forms, a social security number, emergency contacts, a scanned image of a driver's license, and a benefits enrollment history. The file for R. Hartnell had none of that. It was a hollow shell. The fields for tax identification were filled with a string of zeros. The address was the same post office box in Delaware I had seen for the logistics company. But the user ID caught my eye. Every employee at Harbor Vanta has a unique ID generated by the HR software. It usually starts with the year of hire followed by a 6-digit sequence. My ID started with 2021. The ID for R. Hartnell started with test. I stopped typing and leaned closer to the screen. Test was the prefix we used for the sandbox environment. When we were building the new payroll integration 6 months ago, I had created a dozen dummy profiles to ensure the system could handle transfers without crashing. We used names like John Doe, Jane Smith, and Test User 1. Someone had taken one of those sandbox profiles, copied it, and pasted it into the live production environment. I traced the creation log. The profile had been migrated from the test server to the live server on October 14th. I looked at the code. It was a sloppy copy-paste job. They had not even bothered to scrub the metadata. In the notes field of the user profile, hidden deep in the back-end view that only a developer would see, it still said, "Sandbox object, do not use for live payroll." They were paying a test dummy. I pulled up the transaction history for this R. Hartnell on November 1st, a transfer of $15,000. On December 1st, a transfer of $15,000. On January 15th, a retention bonus of $50,000, $80,000 in 3 months, paid to a ghost. I looked at the authorization chain for the January payment. A sum that large required 2 signatures. The first digital signature belonged to Miles Ketter, CFO. The second signature belonged to Trent Hargrove, CEO. Under the justification field, Trent had typed 2 words, strategic retention. I sat back in my chair, the cold leather pressing against my spine. This was not just about stiffing me on a bonus to save cash. This was a pipeline. They had created a fake employee, legitimized it with executive approval, and were siphoning money out of the company into a shell account. They were stealing from the company they ran. If I was right, and I knew I was, this was embezzlement. It was fraud. It was prison time. My $20,000 was irrelevant now. I had stumbled onto a crime scene, and I was holding the murder weapon. I looked around the office. To my left, a junior developer was eating a sandwich and debugging code. To my right, the marketing team was laughing about a viral video. They had no idea that the men in the corner offices were stripping the copper wiring out of the walls while the house was still standing. I needed to secure the evidence. If Trent or Miles realized I was looking at this, they would try to wipe the servers. They would crash the system if they had to. I reached into my bag and pulled out my encrypted solid-state drive. It was a ruggedized drive, military grade, with a keypad on the casing that required a 12-digit PIN just to mount it. I plugged it in. I did not just copy the files. I created a forensic image of the relevant database sectors. I captured the logs, the user profile for Hartnell, the transaction receipts, and the digital signatures. I also captured the sandbox creation logs to prove the origin of the fake profile. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 10%, 40%, 90%, complete. I ejected the drive and slipped it into the hidden pocket of my laptop bag. But one backup is not enough. Not when you are dealing with people who have millions of dollars to lose. I opened a secure browser and logged into a private cloud server I maintained, one that was completely thoroughly dissociated from my identity. I uploaded a second copy of the evidence there. Then, I took a physical step. I printed the key documents, the retention bonus authorization with Trent's signature, the test user profile, the bank transfer logs showing the money going to the Delaware post office box. I placed the papers in a plain manila envelope. I sealed it. I took a red marker and wrote a name on the front, Graham Sutter. Graham was a former board member, a man of rigid ethics who had mentored me when I first started. He had retired 2 years ago. pushed out by Trent's new vision. If anyone would know what to do with this, it was him. I wrote a second note on the back of the envelope. Do not open unless I give the signal, or if I go silent for more than 48 hours. I checked the time. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The office was beginning to thin out. People were packing up, talking about dinner plans, complaining about the traffic on the connector. I stood up, I packed my laptop, I put on my coat. My heart was beating with a slow, heavy rhythm. I was not afraid. I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was walking through a graveyard, but I was the only one who knew the bodies were about to be dug up. I walked past Elaine's office. The door was closed. I could see her silhouette through the frosted glass. Phone pressed to her ear. She was probably trying to figure out how to write a contract addendum that would make my protocol go away. She was trying to fix a leak with a Band-Aid, unaware that the dam had already burst. I walked to the elevator bank. Trent walked out of the executive suite just as I pressed the button. He stopped when he saw me. He looked tired. The fake tan seemed orange under the harsh lights. Going home. Lucy, he asked. His voice was strained, trying to sound casual but failing. Yes. Trent, I said. It has been a productive day. He narrowed his eyes, looking for a crack in my armor. We are working on that paperwork, he said. You will have it by tomorrow morning. Then we can put this whole misunderstanding behind us. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had signed off on $80,000 to a ghost while telling me my bonus was in the pipes. I am sure we will, I said. The elevator arrived with a cheerful ding. I stepped inside and turned to face him. As the doors slid shut, cutting off his view of me, I allowed myself a very small, very cold smile. I did not stay late to fight. I did not scream. I did not make a scene. I left on time. Because a fire burns most beautifully when the person who struck the match has already left the room, I did not send the email from my apartment. That would have been a rookie mistake. Home IP addresses can be traced, and while I have the skills to mask them, I preferred the physical anonymity of a crowded space. I sat in a coffee shop 3 blocks away from the office, a place where the baristas were too busy to notice who was sitting in the corner and the Wi-Fi was open but insecure. That is why I used my personal laptop, booted into a portable Linux operating system from a USB stick, and routed my connection through a double-hop virtual private network based in Switzerland. I created a new, encrypted email account. The username was a random string of alphanumeric characters. I did not need a clever alias. This was not a movie. This was a transaction of information. I addressed the email to the distribution list for the internal audit committee of the board of directors. This was a specific group of people, separate from the executive team, whose sole legal responsibility was to ensure the financial health and compliance of the company. They were the watchdogs that Trent Hargrove thought he had put to sleep. I kept the message brief. Long, emotional rants get deleted. Bullet points get read. Subject irregularities in Q4. Executive disbursements, and vendor validation. I typed the body of the text with clinical precision. 1. 3 executive performance bonuses were paid from the Employee Compensation Fund despite missed performance targets. 2. Multiple payments totaling $80,000 have been issued to a vendor listed as R. Hartnell. 3. There is no tax documentation, contract, or verified identity associated with the Hartnell entity. 4. Search keywords, discretionary realignment, retention bonus, sandbox profile. I did not sign it. I did not add a threat. I did not ask for my $20,000. I hovered over the send button. This was the moment the pebble hit the water. Up until now, this had been a dispute between me and management. Once I pressed this key, it became an investigation. The audit committee was legally obligated to investigate credible whistleblowing tips. If they ignored it and the company later collapsed, they would be personally liable. They would not ignore it. I pressed enter. The message sent instantly. I closed the lid of my laptop, wiped the USB stick, and finished my black coffee. It was 8:30 in the morning. By the time I walked into the Harbor Vanta office at 9 o'clock, the digital ecosystem had already shifted. Usually, The company's Slack channels are a constant stream of memes, project updates, and lunch plans. Today, the general channels were strangely quiet. It was the kind of silence that happens when everyone is messaging each other in private groups. I walked to my desk. I could feel the eyes on me, but I did not look back. I opened my work computer and began my standard daily diagnostics. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me sweat. At 10 o'clock, I saw Trent Hargrove walk across the floor. He was smiling, but it was a terrifying expression. It looked as if someone had stapled the corners of his mouth to his ears. His eyes were darting around the room, scanning faces, trying to guess who had betrayed him. He stopped at the assistant's desk and laughed too loudly at a joke that was not funny. He was projecting confidence, but he was vibrating with anxiety. He looked like a man who had just realized his parachute was actually a backpack full of silverware. Miles Ketter was worse. I saw the CFO standing by the elevator banks. He pressed the button, waited for the doors to open, looked inside, and then decided to take the stairs. He was avoiding small, confined spaces where he might be trapped with the wrong person. He looked pale, his usually crisp shirt slightly rumpled. He was checking his phone every 30 seconds. The audit committee had likely sent out a preliminary inquiry notification. They would not have accused anyone yet. They would have just asked for access to specific ledgers. That request alone was enough to make a guilty man stop using the elevator. At 11 o'clock, my internal line rang. It was Elaine Sutcliffe. Her voice was different today. Yesterday, she had been the corporate shield, trying to deflect my contract claims. Today, she sounded like a detective. "Lucy, could you come to my office?" she asked. It was not a demand. It was a request. I walked into her office. Elaine did not have my contract on her desk this time. She had a blank legal pad. She motioned for me to close the door. "I have received some interesting inquiries this morning from the board," she said, watching my face closely. "They are asking for detailed timelines regarding the Q4 payouts." I sat down and crossed my legs. "That sounds like standard procedure," I said neutrally. Elaine leaned forward. "Lucy, if there is something going on here that goes beyond a payroll glitch, I need to know. I cannot protect the company if I'm fighting in the dark." She was shifting. She was realizing that Trent and Miles might be sinking the ship, and she did not want to go down with them. She was offering me a chance to ally with her. I maintained my composure. I provided all the relevant information regarding my contract invocation yesterday. "Elaine, my concern is strictly regarding the security of my intellectual property and the failure of the company to meet its compensation obligations. If the board is looking into the ledgers, I am sure they will find what they are looking for." I gave her nothing. I did not confess to sending the email. I did not mention Hartnell. Elaine looked at me for a long moment. She saw that I was not going to break. She nodded. Slowly, "I am going to need a full timeline of your interactions with Miles regarding the bonus," she said. "In writing. By the end of the day." "Understood," I said. I left her office. She was no longer trying to solve the problem internally. She was building a file. She was preparing to defend herself. At 1 in the afternoon, the desperation kicked in. An email popped up in my inbox from Caroline Voss, the HR director. The subject line was urgent, immediate wire transfer. The body of the email was frantic. "Lucy, we have authorized an emergency off-cycle payment of $20,000 to your personal account. We need you to reply to this email confirming receipt and agreeing to lift the security protocols immediately. We can sort out the tax paperwork later. Please confirm." She was trying to buy me off. She was trying to clear the debt before the auditors looked at the books. If she could show that I had been paid, she could claim that my contract invocation was moot and that the whole thing was just a misunderstanding. I did not reply to her. Instead, I clicked forward. I addressed the forwarded email to Elaine Sutcliffe. I copied the external legal counsel address listed in my contract. I typed a single sentence. "I am forwarding this communication to legal counsel as it appears to be a proposal to bypass standard payroll taxation and compliance procedures. I refuse this patchwork payment method and will only accept restitution that follows the strict letter of Clause 9.3. I hit send. I had just turned Caroline's lifeline into a noose. by refusing the off-the-books payment and flagging it to legal. I had documented that HR was willing to break financial compliance rules to silence me. Elaine would have to add this to her file. She would have to warn Caroline to stop. The trap was closing. I spent the rest of the afternoon working on a low-priority server maintenance ticket. I was the picture of a diligent employee. I watched the clock tick toward 4. Then, a notification appeared on my screen. It was a calendar invitation. The organizer was Graham Sutter. Graham was a legend at Harbor Vanta. He was one of the original founders, a man who believed in clean code and cleaner business. He had served on the board for 15 years. He was semi-retired now, only showing up for quarterly meetings, but he still held significant sway. He had been my mentor when I was a junior architect. He taught me that a system is only as good as the ethics of the person running it. The subject of the meeting was simply coffee. The duration was 15 minutes. The time was 4:30. The location was the private call booth on the 4th floor. My pulse quickened slightly. This was it. The internal audit committee had received my tip. They had looked at the data, and now they had sent the one person I trusted to verify the source. I walked to the 4th floor. The office was still quiet, but the tension had thickened. It felt like the drop in pressure before a tornado touches down. I entered the call booth and closed the soundproof glass door. I accepted the video call. Graham's face appeared on the screen. He looked older than I remembered. His hair completely white, but his eyes were sharp. He was sitting in his home library, surrounded by books. "Hello, Lucy?" he said. His voice was warm, but serious. "Hello. Graham?" I replied. He did not waste time with small talk. He did not ask how I was doing. "I received an interesting piece of reading material this morning," he said. "Anonymous, of course, but the syntax, the structure of the data, it felt very familiar." I said nothing. I just looked at him. He adjusted his glasses. "The board is convening an emergency session tomorrow." Graham continued. "We are bringing in an external forensic team, but before we tear the floorboards up, I need to know one thing." He leaned into the camera. "Are there backups?" He knew. He knew that if Trent and Miles were cornered, they would try to delete the evidence. He was asking if I had secured the insurance policy. I nodded once, a microscopic movement. "Yes," I said. 3 copies. Encrypted." Graham sat back. A look of relief washed over his face. "Good," he said. "Keep them safe. And Lucy?" "Yes. Don't sign anything until you hear from me." He ended the call. The screen went black. I sat in the booth for a moment, listening to the silence. Graham Sutter was involved. The board was moving. The external auditors were coming. I walked back to my desk. I saw Trent Hargrove staring at his computer screen, his face pale, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. He looked like he was trying to hold the furniture down. He did not know it yet, but the ground had already opened up beneath him. Tuesday morning arrived with the heavy, static atmosphere of a storm that refuses to break. The office was functioning, but barely. The coffee machine hissed in the break room. Phones rang in the sales department, and the janitorial staff pushed their carts across the gray carpet. But beneath the surface, the organism was dying. I could feel it. The whispers had stopped, replaced by meaningful glances and the sudden shutting of browser windows when a manager walked by. I did not go to my desk immediately. Instead, I walked straight to the legal department. Elaine Sutcliffe's office was a glass cage at the far end of the hallway. She was sitting at her desk, staring at a stack of paper that looked like it might topple over. She was not reading. She was dissociating. She looked like a woman who had realized the lifeboat she was sitting in had a hole in the bottom. I knocked once on the glass door. She looked up, her eyes startled and rimmed with red. She waved me in. I entered and closed the door behind me. I locked it. The click of the latch was loud in the quiet room. I was carrying a thin red folder. I placed it on her desk, directly on top of the chaotic pile of papers she had been ignoring. The label on the folder was printed in bold. Black letters, "Privileged counsel only." Elaine looked at the folder, then at me. "What is this, Lucy?" she asked, her voice raspy. I sat down in the chair opposite her. I did not smile. This was not a friendly visit. This was a professional courtesy before the execution. It is the timeline you asked for, I said, but it is also the context you need. It contains the server logs, the metadata for the approval chain, and the reconciliation reports between the internal ledger and the bank statements. Elaine reached for the folder. Her hand trembled slightly. She opened it. The first page was a summary I had compiled. It was a simple table with 2 columns. The left column showed the authorized executive bonuses for the 4th quarter. The right column showed the actual cash flow leaving the company accounts. I watched her eyes scan the page. I saw the exact moment she stopped breathing. She had found the mismatch. She flipped the page. I had included a screenshot of the tax filing for the previous year, highlighting the section where the company declared executive compensation. Then, I had overlaid the transfer logs for the ghost employee, R. Hartnell. Elaine looked up at me. Her face had gone completely white. "These numbers do not match the filings," she whispered. I nodded. "That is correct," I said. "The compensation reported to the IRS is significantly lower than the actual cash outflow. The difference is being routed through a vendor that does not exist." Elaine closed the folder. She pressed her hand on top of it as if trying to keep the information from escaping into the room. "This is not just a contract dispute anymore," she said. Her voice was barely audible. "This is securities fraud. This is tax evasion." She looked at the phone on her desk. The red light was blinking. Trent had been trying to reach her all morning. "Why are you giving this to me?" she asked. "You could have gone straight to the SEC. You could have gone to the press." I leaned forward. "I am giving it to you because you are the general counsel. Elaine, your job is not to protect Trent Hargrove. Your job is to protect Harbor Vanta Solutions." I paused to let the weight of that distinction settle on her shoulders. Lawyers often forget who their client actually is. They confuse the person in the big chair with the entity that signs their paycheck. "You have a choice to make," I continued, my voice low and steady. "You can be the lawyer who saved the company by purging the infection, or you can be the lawyer who tried to hide the body." Elaine flinched at the word body. It was a violent image, but appropriate. "If I take this to the board," she said, thinking out loud, "the stock will tank. The investigation will be brutal. Trent will be fired. Miles will be fired. And the company will survive." I finished for her. "It will be painful, but it will survive." I looked at the folder under her hand. "But if you bury this, Elaine, if you try to help them cover up $80,000 of embezzlement and tax fraud, then you are not just a witness. You are a co-conspirator. And when the external auditors find this, and they will find it, you will go down with them." Elaine looked at the phone again. It started to ring. The caller ID flashed Trent Sell. She stared at the screen. The ringing sound seemed deafening in the small office. "How do you know the auditors will find it?" she asked, her eyes still on the phone. "Because I have already sent a sealed copy of that folder to a supervisor who has a fiduciary duty to open it." I lied. Well, it was a half-truth. Graham Sutter had the envelope. He was not technically her supervisor, but he was the board's conscience. I saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. She was weighing loyalty against self-preservation. She was weighing a 5-year working relationship with Trent against the possibility of losing her license to practice law. She looked at me. "If I act on this," she said, "I need to know that I am the one controlling the disclosure. I cannot have you leaking this to the blogs while I'm trying to negotiate a surrender." I stood up. "I do not care about the blogs. Elaine, I care about the integrity of the system. You handle the legal cleanup. I will handle the technical restitution. As long as the truth is on the record, my protocol remains dormant." The phone was still ringing. Trent was persistent. Elaine took a deep breath. She reached out, but she did not pick up the receiver. She reached for the volume button and silenced the ringer. The room went quiet. She looked at the folder again. She opened her drawer and pulled out a fresh legal pad. She uncapped her pen. "I need everything," she said. Her voice was stronger now. It was the voice of a prosecutor, not a defender. "I need every email, every chat log, every digital fingerprint you have. I pointed to the folder. "It is all there," I said. I turned and walked to the door. I unlocked it. "Lucy," Elaine called out just as I was stepping into the hallway. I turned back. "Thank you," she said. I did not reply. I did not need her gratitude. I needed her to do her job. I went back to my desk and worked through the rest of the afternoon. The atmosphere in the office shifted again. Around 3 o'clock, I saw Elaine walk into the elevator with the red folder tucked under her arm. She was heading up to the executive floor, but not to Trent's office. She was going to the conference room where the external directors usually met. Trent came out of his office 10 minutes later. He looked frantic. He stormed over to Elaine's assistant. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Why is she not answering her phone?" "She is in a meeting, Mr. Hargrove," the assistant said, looking terrified. "With who?" Trent snapped. "With the audit chair." The assistant whispered. Trent froze. He looked at the elevator doors. He looked back at his office. For the first time, he realized that his legal counsel was no longer his armor. She had become a scalpel, and she was cutting him out to save the patient. He retreated into his office and slammed the door. I packed up my things at 5 o'clock. I went home, made a simple dinner, and sat on my couch. I did not turn on the television. I waited. At 8:30 that evening, my secure email client pinged. It was a forwarded message from Elaine. The subject line was Privileged Evidence Item 04. She had found it, or maybe Miles, in a panic, had tried to justify himself and accidentally handed her the smoking gun. I opened the email. It was a thread from 3 months ago. The conversation was between Trent Hargrove and Miles Ketter. Trent: "We are short on the deposit for the St. John Villa. The vendor is threatening to cancel the booking. We need to secure it by Friday, or we lose the venue." Miles: "The operating account is tapped out until the client payments clear next month. I don't have the liquidity." Trent: "What about the bonus pool? There is a surplus in the engineering allocation." Miles: "That is earmarked for the Q4 performance payouts. Lucy Lopez and the dev team hit their targets. Trent: "Shift it. Create a diversion code. Use the retention category. We can pay them later when the Series B money comes in. They won't notice a few weeks delay. Just get it done. Lucy's bonus covers the last villa. Make it happen." I stared at the screen. Lucy's bonus covers the last villa. There it was. Explicit. Undeniable. They had not just mismanaged the money. They had looked at my name, looked at the money I had earned, and decided that their vacation was more important than my livelihood. I felt a cold, hard knot of satisfaction in my chest. Elaine had sent me this for a reason. She was telling me that she had chosen a side. She was armed. She was going to war. I closed the laptop. The king was exposed. The queen had turned. The board was cleared. Tomorrow, the game would end. Wednesday was the day the panic turned into aggression. When a cornered animal realizes it cannot escape the cage, it stops looking for the door and starts trying to bite the hand that feeds it. Trent Hargrove had realized the door was locked, so he decided to try and tear my throat out. It started with a whisper campaign that quickly became a shout. By 10 in the morning, the narrative had shifted. Trent was no longer the CEO trying to fix a payroll error. He was the victim of a cyber terrorist. He held an emergency all-hands meeting in the atrium, one that I was noticeably not invited to, but I watched it from the mezzanine. He stood on the stage, his sleeves rolled up, looking ragged but determined. He told the staff that a rogue employee had planted a logic bomb in the system. He used words like ransomware and malicious code. He claimed that this individual was holding the company hostage for financial gain and that he was working with federal authorities to neutralize the threat. He never said my name, but he did not have to. Everyone knew who ran the architecture. He was trying to frame me as a criminal hacker before the audit results could come out. He thought he was painting me as a villain. In reality, he was just walking into another one of my traps. I went back to my desk and opened a secure email client. I had anticipated this move weeks ago. You do not trigger a protocol like Clause 9.2 without verifying your own footing. 3 days before I sent the first email, I had hired an independent digital forensics firm called Blackstone Cyber. They were expensive, billing $400 an hour, but their reputation was unimpeachable. I had given them read-only access to my code repository and the contract. They had conducted a full audit of the trigger mechanism. I opened the document they had sent me on Monday. It was a certificate of validation. It stated clearly, in technical and legal terms, that the code running on the Harbor Vanta servers was a pre-existing, contractually authorized digital rights management tool. It verified that the code did not damage data, did not exfiltrate privacy information, and was strictly a license enforcement mechanism. I forwarded this document to Elaine Sutcliffe. I added a simple note. Trent is currently making public statements claiming criminal sabotage. Please find attached the independent forensic certification proving that the system is functioning exactly as described in my employment agreement. If Trent continues this narrative, I will add defamation to the list of grievances. I watched Elaine read the email through the glass wall of her office. She put her head in her hands. She knew that Trent had just dug the hole 6 feet deeper. By claiming it was a crime, he had invited law enforcement scrutiny, and if the police looked at the code, they would see the forensic certificate clearing me, and then they would look at why the code was triggered. They would find the embezzlement. While legal was trying to muzzle the CEO, human resources decided to panic. Caroline Voss was not built for this level of pressure. She was a woman who excelled at planning birthday parties and organizing trust falls, not managing corporate collapse. She tried to fix the problem the only way she knew how. At 11:30, my system alerts flashed red. Someone was trying to force a manual override in the payroll database. I watched the logs. Caroline was logged in as an administrator. She was trying to create a new payment batch for $20,000, payable to me. But she was doing something incredibly stupid. She was manually altering the transaction date to make it look like the payment had been processed last Friday. She was trying to backdate the wire transfer to make it appear as if the default had never happened. She was trying to rewrite history to erase the breach. I did not have to stop her. Elaine did. The legal intercept software, which Elaine had ordered installed only yesterday, flagged the backdated timestamp immediately. I saw the chat log pop up on the admin console. Elaine messaged Caroline directly. Stop. Do not process that transaction. Altering financial timestamps to obscure a liability event is wire fraud. If you press enter, you are personally liable for falsifying business records. The cursor on the screen froze. Caroline did not press enter. She logged off. The system went idle. They were paralyzed. They could not pay me forward because I refused it. They could not pay me backward because it was a crime. They were stuck in the present, exactly where I wanted them. By 2 p.m, the CFO began to dissolve. Miles Ketter had been hiding in his office all day, but his department was leaking. The finance team consists of people who are good at math and bad at lying. They saw the frantic transfers, the blocked payments, and the sudden scrutiny from legal. They knew the ship was going down, and the rats were starting to jump. A junior analyst, a quiet young man named David, whom I had helped with a database query 2 months ago, walked past my desk. He did not look at me. He did not stop. But as he passed, he dropped a flash drive into the open pocket of my cardigan hanging on the back of my chair. It was a smooth, practiced motion. He kept walking to the elevator and left the building. I plugged the drive into my isolated sandbox laptop. It contained a single PDF file. It was an invoice from the vendor Hartnell Logistics. But attached to the invoice was the original receipt that had been scanned and renamed. The invoice said Client Engagement Seminar. The attached receipt was from a company called Sapphire Villa Rentals in St. John. The itemized list included a 7-night stay, a private chef, and a case of vintage champagne. The total was exactly $20,000. The dates matched the fake invoice perfectly. There was a handwritten note in the margin of the receipt, in Miles Ketter's distinctive scrawl, reclassed to Hartnell, code as BizDev. It was the smoking gun. It proved that the creation of the fake vendor was not an accident or a clerical error. It was a deliberate, manual action taken to disguise personal spending as business expenses. I opened my master evidence folder. I created a new tab. I labeled it Malice. In legal terms, malice is a powerful concept. It distinguishes between a mistake and a crime. It proves intent. They did not just forget to pay me. They actively planned to steal my money to buy champagne, and then they built a system to hide it. I uploaded the receipt to the folder. I synced it to the secure cloud that Graham Sutter could access. The afternoon wore on. The tension in the office was physical. Like the air pressure before a hurricane, people were leaving early, no one was working, they were just waiting for the lightning to strike. I left at 6. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the parking lot. I walked to my car, my keys in my hand, my senses alert. I unlocked my door. But before I could get in, a black SUV pulled up directly behind me, blocking me in. The window rolled down. It was Trent. He looked terrible. His tie was undone, his eyes were bloodshot, and the confident veneer was completely gone. He looked like a man who had not slept in 48 hours. "Lucy," he said. His voice was rough. I stood by my open door, using the frame as a barrier. "I have nothing to say to you." "Trent." He opened his door and stepped out. He held up his hands in a gesture of surrender, but his body language was aggressive. He moved into my personal space. "This has gone too far," he said. "You proved your point. You are smart. You won. Okay, you won." He reached into his jacket pocket. I tensed, ready to reach for the pepper spray on my keychain, but he pulled out a checkbook. "I can write you a check right now," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Personal funds, 20,000, plus another 50,000 as a retainer for independent consulting. We can call it a settlement. No lawyers, no board. Just you and me fixing this." He was trying to bribe me. He was trying to buy my silence with money he probably did not even have, considering his spending habits. I looked at the checkbook. Then I looked at his face. I saw the fear in his eyes. He was terrified of losing his title, his status, his identity. He thought everyone could be bought because he had sold himself so cheaply. "I do not want your money." "Trent," I said. He stepped closer, his face flushing with anger. "Then what do you want? Do you want to destroy the company? Do you want to put 200 people out of work?" I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "Do not pretend you care about the people. Trent, you stole from the people to pay for a vacation. You are the one destroying the company. I am just the error message." I got into my car and slammed the door. I locked it immediately. Trent stood there for a moment, holding his checkbook, looking impotent and small. He realized then that he had no power over me. He could not fire me because I had the keys. He could not buy me because I did not have a price. He moved his SUV, and I drove away without looking back. I drove home and watched the clock. The second protocol was set to engage at midnight. Clause 9.2 was the warning shot. It restricted access to the integration layer. It slowed things down. But Clause 9.4, the midnight protocol, was the siege engine. When the clock struck 12, the system would shift into license key mode. This meant that every single core process dispatch, tracking, billing, payroll, would require a unique, rotating cryptographic key to function, a key that only I possessed. Without that key, the software would not crash. It would simply stop accepting input. The trucks would not get their routes. The warehouse robots would not get their pick lists. The invoices would not generate. The company would become a beautiful, expensive, frozen statue. I sat on my balcony with a glass of water. I watched the city lights of Atlanta. Somewhere in those lights, Trent was calling lawyers, Miles was shredding paper, Elaine was drinking scotch. I looked at my watch. 11:59. The second hand swept around the dial. 12 midnight. My phone vibrated once. It was a notification from my server. Protocol level 2 active. System locked. Awaiting key. I put the phone down. The silence of the night felt heavy and absolute. The game was no longer in check. The king was trapped. There were no moves left. The silence that had fallen over Harbor Vanta Solutions was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a stopped heart. When I walked into the building on Thursday morning, the usual hum of commerce was gone. The server fans were spinning, but the data was stagnant. The dispatch screens in the lobby, usually a waterfall of moving trucks and delivery times, were frozen on a static blue screen requesting a license authentication key. I did not go to my desk. I was met at the elevator by a security guard I did not recognize. He was not one of our regulars. He was wearing a dark suit and an earpiece. "Ms. Lopez," he said, his voice professional and devoid of threat. "The board is waiting for you in the executive boardroom." He swiped a keycard to take us to the top floor. This was not the floor where Trent had his glass-walled office. This was the floor above it, a space reserved for the people who actually owned the chessboard. The boardroom was a cavernous space dominated by a long table made of polished walnut that looked like it cost more than my parents' house. The windows were floor to ceiling, offering a panoramic view of Atlanta, but the blinds were angled shut, cutting the room off from the world. I stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me with a seal-like finality. The atmosphere in the room was colder than the server room. 12 people sat around the table. Most were older men and women in expensive suits. The silent investors who viewed the company as a line item in a portfolio. At the far end sat Graham Sutter. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. To my right sat the remnants of the management team. Miles Ketter was sitting hunched over, staring at his hands. In the span of a week, the CFO seemed to have aged 10 years. His skin was gray, his eyes were sunken, and he had the look of a man who was waiting for a biopsy result he already knew was positive. Next to him was Caroline Voss. The HR director was falling apart. She was blinking rapidly, a nervous tic that made her look like a glitching video file. She kept smoothing her skirt, over and over again, her hands unable to stay still. But the most significant presence in the room was an absence. The chair at the head of the table, usually reserved for the chief executive officer, was empty. Trent Hargrove was not there. His absence was a crater in the room. It told me everything I needed to know. The board had already cut the head off the snake. Now they were trying to figure out how to deal with the venom. Sitting next to the empty chair was a man I did not know. He was young, sharp-featured, and wore rimless glasses. He had a laptop open in front of him, and he was typing with a speed that suggested he spoke my language. Elaine Sutcliffe stood up. She looked exhausted, but her spine was straight. She was no longer playing the role of the corporate shield. She had assessed the damage, realized the ship was sinking, and decided to become the captain of the lifeboat. She did not offer a preamble. She did not introduce me. She simply picked up a document from the table. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Elaine began, her voice clear and devoid of emotion. "We are here to address the invocation of Clause 9.2 of the Employment Agreement regarding Ms. Lucy Lopez." She looked around the room, making eye contact with the key investors. "There has been a misconception among the executive leadership that this clause was," and I quote, flavor text, "I am here to clarify, as general counsel, that this is a binding, non-negotiable contractual term. It was drafted 3 years ago, vetted by our legal team at the time, and signed by the CEO. It grants Ms. Lopez specific intellectual property rights in the event of a compensation default." She paused, letting the words settle. "The default has been verified. The compensation was withheld. The protocol was activated legally. This is not a hack. This is not sabotage. This is the execution of a contract." A murmur went through the room. The narrative Trent had tried to spin that I was a cyber terrorist had just been dismantled by his own lawyer. A man with silver hair and a tie that cost $1,000 leaned forward. This was Robert Vance, the chairman of the board. "What is the technical status?" Vance asked. "Can we override it?" Elaine gestured to the young man with the rimless glasses. "This is Noah Feldman," Elaine said. "He is an independent forensic auditor from Cyberwatch. We brought him in at 4 this morning to assess the code." Noah stopped typing. He looked up, adjusting his glasses. His voice was dry, clinical, and devastating. "I have reviewed the architecture," Noah said. "Ms. Lopez has built a highly sophisticated system. The lockout protocol is not a simple password gate. It is woven into the syntax of the operation layer." He turned his laptop around to show a complex diagram on the main projector screen. "The code uses a dynamic watermarking system. Noah explained. Think of it like a die pack in a bank bag. If you try to force the system open, or if you try to copy the data to a new server to bypass the lock, the watermark explodes. It flags every single file as stolen intellectual property. It alerts the software vendors that their licenses are being used on unauthorized machines. It essentially bricks the entire compliance framework. He looked at Vance. If you try to bypass this without the key, you will not only lose the data integrity, but you will also trigger automatic breach notifications to your clients, your bank, and the federal regulators. You will be sued by every logistics partner you have. Vance frowned. So we are locked out. You are paused, Noah corrected. The engine is running, but the transmission is in neutral, and the only person who can put it back in gear is the person holding the license key. The room went silent again. The power had shifted completely. They were not looking at an employee anymore. They were looking at the owner of the building they were renting. Vance turned to Elaine. What is our exposure here? He asked. Elaine did not flinch. It depends on the speed of our response, she said. Every hour we remain offline costs us approximately $200,000 in delayed shipping revenue. But that is the minor cost. The major cost is legal. If this drags on for another 24 hours, we have to file a material event disclosure with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We have to explain why we are offline, and that explanation will lead to the discovery of the financial irregularities that triggered the default. She glanced at Miles Ketter. Miles flinched as if she had thrown a stone at him. We are looking at shareholder lawsuits, regulatory fines, and potential criminal investigations into the executive disbursements. Elaine continued. The exposure is total. The company could be insolvent within a month. Caroline Voss let out a small, strangled sob. She clamped her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. She was realizing that following orders was not going to save her. Graham Sutter cleared his throat. The sound was quiet, but it commanded the room. Everyone turned to him. Graham had been watching me the entire time. He was not looking at the papers. He was not looking at the screen. He was looking at my hands, which were folded calmly on the table. He leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing on his lips. It was not a happy smile, but a smile of recognition. I remember when I hired you. Lucy, Graham said. His voice was warm, a sharp contrast to the cold sterility of the room. I asked you what your philosophy on system architecture was. Do you remember what you told me? I nodded. I told you that a system is only as robust as its ability to correct its own errors. I said. Graham nodded. And you also told me that you play chess, he added. You said that most people play to capture pieces, but you play to control the board. He looked at Vance, then back at me. She always looks at the board before she touches a piece. Graham said to the room. She did not do this to destroy the company. If she wanted to destroy us, she would have let Trent keep stealing until the accounts were empty. She did this to force a correction. He looked me in the eye. So, Lucy, the correction is forced. The board is listening. We are bleeding. Vance clasped his hands together. He looked at me with a mixture of respect and resentment. He was a man used to dictating terms, and he hated that he had to ask for them. Ms. Lopez, Vance said stiffly. We accept the validity of the contract. We acknowledge the default. We are prepared to discuss a settlement. What are your terms for releasing the key? The word terms hung in the air. They still thought this was a transaction. They thought I was holding out for a bigger bonus, or a promotion, or stock options. They thought everyone had a price that could be written on a check. I stood up. The chair scraped softly against the carpet. I smoothed my blazer. I looked at Miles, who could not meet my gaze. I looked at Caroline, who was shaking. I looked at the empty chair where Trent should have been. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the absolute certainty of a mathematician stating a proof. This is not a negotiation. Mr. Vance, I said, I am not a hostage taker, and I am not a mercenary. I do not want a settlement. I walked over to the whiteboard at the side of the room. I picked up a black marker. I wrote 3 words on the board in block letters. Restitution. Accountability Exit. I turned back to them. I am not here to bargain. I said, I am here to reconcile the books with the truth. I pointed to the first word, restitution. I said, I want the $20,000 I earned. Not a penny more, not a penny less. I want the penalty fees stipulated in the contract for late payment. And I want the retroactive licensing fees for the time the system has been operating in default. This is not a demand for extra money. This is a demand for what is owed. I pointed to the second word, accountability. I continued, I want a formal written admission from the board that the default was caused by the misappropriation of funds by the executive team. I want the investigation into the Hartnell Logistics payments to be made public to the shareholders. I want the people who treated the company treasury like a personal piggy bank to be removed. I looked at the empty chair. I assume Trent is already gone. I said, but the infection is not just in the head, it is in the body. I looked at Miles. Miles Ketter must resign, effective immediately. I said, and Caroline Voss must be placed under administrative review for attempting to falsify financial records to cover up the breach. Caroline let out a gasp. Miles just closed his eyes. I pointed to the third word. Exit, I said. Once the money is paid and the admissions are signed, I will turn over the master encryption key. I will provide a full transition document to Noah. And then I will resign. Vance looked stunned. You want to leave? He asked. We would be willing to offer you a significant raise to stay. You clearly know how to run this place better than anyone. I shook my head. I cannot work for a system I do not trust, I said, and I cannot build on a foundation that is rotten. I capped the marker and placed it on the table. The sound was like a gavel striking a block. Those are the conditions, I said. They are not negotiable. You have 1 hour to decide. After that, the system begins to archive data to cold storage, and bringing it back online will take weeks, not hours. I sat back down. The room was silent. But it was no longer the silence of confusion. It was the silence of defeat. They knew they had no choice. The checkmate had happened 3 years ago. They were just now seeing the king fall. I slid the single sheet of paper across the polished walnut table. It made a dry, rasping sound against the wood. Robert Vance looked at it as if it were a death warrant. In a way, it was. This is the invoice, I said. Vance picked it up. He adjusted his reading glasses. The first item was the unpaid bonus of $20,000. The second item was the contractual penalty, calculated at 5% compound interest for every day of the default. The third item was the retroactive licensing fee. Since the company had been using my intellectual property without a valid agreement for the last week, I charged them the standard commercial rate for enterprise software. The total came to $42,500. Vance looked relieved. He had probably expected me to ask for millions. To a company with an operating budget in the 8 figures, $40,000 was a rounding error. He reached for his pen. We can authorize this immediately, Vance said. He looked at Miles Ketter. Miles, cut the check. We will resolve the tax implications later. I did not move. Read the rest. Mr. Vance, I said. Vance looked back down at the paper. His eyes scanned the bottom half of the page. The relief on his face evaporated, replaced by a deep, flushed anger. These are personnel demands, Vance said, his voice tight. You cannot dictate who sits on this board. Ms. Lopez, they are not requests, I replied. They are conditions of the settlement. I pointed to the first name on the list. Trent Hargrove must be terminated for cause. I said, not allowed to resign to spend more time with his family. Not transition to a consulting role. Fired. For embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty. Vance shook his head. We cannot just fire the CEO based on an allegation, he said. Trent is the face of the company. The market reacts to him. I reached into my folder. I had one file left. This was the one I had kept in reserve. The one even Graham Sutter had not seen yet. It is not an allegation, I said. I placed a document on top of the invoice. It was a property deed printed from the public records of Suffolk County, New York. Next to it, I placed the articles of incorporation for Hartnell Logistics, the shell company receiving the stolen funds. I traced the line with my finger. Hartnell Logistics is registered in Delaware, I explained, but the beneficiary address for the bank account is a residential property in the Hamptons. I tapped the deed. That property is owned by a trust. The trustee is a man named Julian Vane. Vance looked confused. Who is Julian Vane? He is Trent Hargrove's brother-in-law. I said. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to stop. Trent did not just steal money to pay for a villa. I continued. He has been funneling company assets into a family account for 6 months. The $80,000 for the ghost employee was just the beginning. I found transfers totaling nearly $250,000 over the last fiscal year, all coded as vendor payments, all going to the same address. I looked at Miles Ketter, and Miles signed off on every single one of them. Miles made a sound like a balloon losing air. He slumped forward, putting his head on the table. He knew it was over. He had thought he was helping the boss hide a few expenses. He did not realize he was laundering money for the boss's family. Vance looked at the documents. He looked at Miles. Then he looked at Graham Sutter. Graham was not smiling anymore. He looked furious. Audit, Graham said. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of a judge passing sentence. We need a full forensic audit of every dime spent in the last 2 years. Vance nodded. He looked back at me. Agreed. Vance said, Trent is gone. Miles is gone. He looked at Caroline Voss. And HR. I looked at Caroline. She was weeping silently, her mascara running down her cheeks. She was not a mastermind. She was just a coward who was afraid to say no to power. Investigation. I said, if she cooperates with the auditors and reveals every override she was forced to make, she keeps her job. If she hides one single email, she goes. Caroline nodded frantically. I checked my watch. You have 30 minutes to execute the wire transfer for my restitution. I said, once the funds clear, I will release the first key. That will bring payroll back online. Once the termination letter for Trent is signed, I will release the second key for dispatch. And once Miles resigns, I will unlock the master admin protocol. Vance did not argue. He picked up the phone in the center of the table. Get legal in here, he barked, and get security to the executive suite. 10 minutes later, the door to the boardroom burst open. Trent Hargrove stood there. He was disheveled, his tie crooked, his face a mask of red-faced rage. He had tried to log into his computer and found himself locked out. He had tried to use his keycard for the elevator and found it deactivated. He had to take the stairs. What is going on? Trent screamed. He pointed a shaking finger at me. Why is she still here? This woman is a criminal. She is sabotaging my company. I want her arrested. He lunged toward the table. Noah Feldman, the young auditor, stood up. He did not look intimidated. He looked bored. Mr. Hargrove, Noah said, holding up a tablet. I am looking at the transaction logs for Hartnell Logistics. We know about the house in the Hamptons. We know about Julian Vane. Trent froze. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like a physical reaction. He stopped mid-step. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. That is a misunderstanding. Trent stammered. That is a legitimate consulting arrangement. It is misappropriation of corporate funds. Noah said, and given the amount, it is likely grand larceny. Security guards appeared in the doorway behind Trent. They were not the friendly lobby guards. They were the serious men Vance had called. Escort Mr. Hargrove to the building exit, Vance said. His voice was cold. Do not let him return to his office. Send his personal effects by courier. Trent looked at Vance. He looked at Miles, who refused to lift his head. He looked at me. For a second, I thought he was going to scream again, but he just crumbled. The arrogance, the bluster, the CEO persona, it all evaporated. He was just a man who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar. He let the guards take him by the arms as they dragged him out. He did not look back. The room was quiet again. My phone buzzed. I looked down. A notification from my bank. Deposit received. $42,500. I looked at Vance. Payment confirmed. I opened my laptop. I typed in a 64-character string of code. Key 1 released. I said, payroll is online. Elaine Sutcliffe slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of the termination notice for Trent Hargrove, signed by the chairman. I typed the second string. Key 2 released. Dispatch is online. The trucks can move. Miles Ketter stood up. He took a pen from his pocket, wrote 2 sentences on a notepad, tore the page out, and handed it to Vance. Then he walked out of the room without a word. I typed the final string. Master protocol unlocked. I said, the system is yours. I closed my laptop. I stood up. I placed a white envelope on the table. What is that? Vance asked. My resignation. I said. Vance stood up. Lucy, please. We need you. We will double your salary. We will give you equity. You just saved us from a disaster. I shook my head. I did not save you. Mr. Vance, I just forced you to look at the rot. You have a lot of work to do to clean this place up, but you will have to do it without me. I picked up my bag. I walked to the door. Graham Sutter was smiling at me. It was a sad smile, but it was proud. Good game. Lucy, he said softly. I nodded. Good game. Graham. I walked out of the boardroom. I took the elevator down to the lobby. The screens were flickering back to life. The blue error messages were gone, replaced by the scrolling lists of deliveries and routes. The organism was breathing again. I walked out the front doors into the bright Atlanta sunshine. It was 11 o'clock on a Thursday. The air was humid and smelled of traffic and jasmine. Cars were honking. People were rushing to lunch. The world was completely indifferent to the drama that had just played out on the top floor. I did not feel a rush of adrenaline. I did not feel the urge to pump my fist in the air. I just felt clean. I took my phone out one last time. I composed an email to the board of directors. I typed a single line, follow the money. That is the only honest scoreboard. I hit send. Then I dropped my employee badge into the trash can by the curb and walked toward my car. I had a lot of free time now, and I finally had the money to enjoy it. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below, letting me know where in the world you are tuning in from, and share your thoughts on Lucy's revenge. If you enjoyed this checkmate, please make sure to subscribe to Boss Revenge Stories. Hit the like button, and smash that hype button to help this story reach more people who need to see justice served.